All right, well, it looks like we have a couple people on here already. So I'm going to go ahead. I believe that we did have um, just one slide. Did you want me to share that slide with the information and everyone's names on it?
Yeah, I think we'll just leave that up for
Okay.
contact information.
All right. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to go ahead and place them in the chat. Otherwise, we also do have some questions that we can that we'll go ahead and post. But this is really an open time for you all, the grantee, to ask some questions. And don't be shy. You can place them in the chat, or you can chat them directly to me. But so I'll go ahead and just kick one off that we have. So would any of you like to answer how an individual would request a budget modification?
Sure, that will be done through our grant system, the JustGrants. So they would enter, log in through JustGrants, and they would attach a detailed budget worksheet, or sometimes we will ask them for an Excel spreadsheet that shows the changes, their original budget, the changes, and then a revised budget, just so that we can see at a glance what the actual changes are, as well as a narrative to explain all of the changes.
And do you know what some of those typical budget modifications are? I know that one of the things that's been coming up for our sites is, because they haven't traveled for the national meeting, but they've done it virtually, some are looking to do that. Are there other ones that are typical that you receive that maybe we could, get ahead of them and let them know about, or is it really a case-by-case basis?
It's probably case-by-case basis, because it's them, the grantee, changing their budgets. So if there's any changes, they need to let us know for prior approval.
Yeah, I think, Jessica, I think I understand your point that some of them may have allocated money to travel to DC for sort of the expected in-person meeting. Now they're not expending those funds, so they may be repurposing those funds. Mm-hmm. And that may entail a budget modification, I think, depending on the amount, and maybe I'm not on the budget end or the program end of things. I used to be when I was at the COPS office, and I think there's a 10% threshold for that. So
no, John, but they still need prior approval for the way they're going to spend their funds. They need to have approval for that.
Okay, so if they were spending $3,000 for, they had planned to spend $3,000 to attend the national meeting in person, and now they're going to repurpose that money, that would necessitate a budget modification.
Yes, they need to let us know. Let's say they're going to buy a computer for the project itself. That would be fine. If they're going to buy a computer for something else, then it wouldn't be approved.
Right, but it has to be related to the project. But if they're repurposing that $3,000, they should include that, submit that as a budget modification, and work with their appropriate state policy advisor.
Yes, and John, I do know what you're getting at, because there is a 10% threshold, but I think what Geraldo is saying is that modifications typically, we prefer that the grantee do come to us if they want to alter any of their budgetary costs, because we just want to make sure that they align with the program, and that they're not any costs that would be disallowed. But there is that 10% threshold, and then there's some other criteria that will warrant them to have to submit a budget mod. So what we traditionally would do would be, the grantee could get that prior approval. It may not rise to the level of a formal budget modification in JustGrants, but that prior approval is recommended, and that can be done via email as well. So there's some other things that would warrant a budget modification that is below the 10% threshold. Like if a grantee is moving costs in or out of the indirect cost line item. Any cost, and it does. There's no threshold for that. Any indirect cost movement requires a formal budget modification, or if they're moving costs into a budgetary category that had not been previously approved, received formal approval by OCFO, that would warrant a formal modification as well. You know, and the threshold does not apply there.
Okay, thanks.
And I apologize. We kind of hopped right in and didn't do introductions. Do all the presenters just want to kind of give a brief overview, you know, who they are, what, and how they're interacting with the project?
Sure, I guess I'll go first. I'm Tamara White, State Policy Advisor for the Bureau of Justice Assistance. I manage grants under this program, the body-worn camera PIP program, and I share that responsibility with my colleague, and we kind of split up the alphabet. I take the A through F states, and he takes the remainder of the states.
Good morning, I'm Gerardo Velasquez, and as my colleague said, I handle the grants for the body-worn camera for H through Z for the whole country.
Let me chime in. My name is John Markovic, and I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at BJA, and I'm the BWC Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program Policy Lead. So I work hand in hand with Gerardo and Tamaro and Darius, who is, I always forget his official title, who's the division chief, that's it, who oversees the state policy advisors. And, you know, so we work hand in hand in getting the grantees through the TTA process, and as well as getting them through the process with their fiscal responsibilities, their grant reporting responsibilities, their budget modifications, and so forth and so on. So I'm sort of the, I work both ends, but mostly on the policy side rather than the program side.
And good morning, I'm Darius Cicero. Like John said, I'm Division Chief for the Southeast Division. I work with Tamara and Gerardo, the body-worn camera program, the JAG program, and a variety of other programs. So welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Tyson. My sort of day job, which is up on the screen, is I'm a senior social science analyst for the National Institute of Justice, but am here as a sort of business representative working on the JustGrants system. And so I'm here to help answer any questions about that.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Hartman. I'm a training specialist with the JustGrants team. My team works together with Jen and her colleagues to provide training materials and training sessions for JustGrants features as they're rolled out. And we also provide support for a training email address, so you can send training questions to us through that address.
Great, thank you, everyone. So now I hope to receive a lot of chats from all the participants who know who all is on the line. So we have another question that we can pose. So another one of the questions is how does a grantee clear a special condition hold on the funds? Can you talk a little bit about what special conditions are and how they clear those?
Well, there's withholding special conditions that the grantee has in their award document. Whichever ones they haven't complied with, they need to provide us the information, and then we can release them directly in JustGrants.
Thanks. I know one of the special.
Let me chime in on that. I think because the body-worn camera program is, many of the recipients are smaller agencies that aren't very grant savvy. They may be first-time grantees. So I think the sergeant or the captain or the lieutenant who might be running the body-worn camera program may have it in his or her mind that there's one special condition, and that it's a special condition unique to BWC PIP, because we want these programs to be implemented with robust, deliberate, and comprehensive policies. There is a requirement that the policy scorecard or self-certification has to be processed, and we hold 90% of their funds. So that is done in tandem with the TTA provider, who works with maybe that sergeant, lieutenant, or a captain on reviewing their body-worn cameras policy, making sure that it's comprehensive and deliberately done, or they receive the self-certification from the agency that gets sent to me. I look it over and approve it, and then I send that to Gerardo or Tamara, and they clear that special condition. That sergeant, lieutenant, or captain may not know, and the grant administrator would know whether there are other special conditions that hold. So sometimes the special conditions is there was a form that should have been required when they submitted the application. The application was fairly robust. They were accepted for funding, so they owe that form. I think one of them might be disclosure of pending grants. So when they apply, you should provide a notification whether you've applied for similar funding, in this case, for body-worn cameras. A lot of times those fall through the cracks, and then we just get those retroactively. But other conditions that may hold are if you're delinquent in your reporting and so forth and so on. So it's really the grant administrator who would be attentive to those special conditions. And sometimes in some of our agencies, that may be the sergeant, lieutenant, or captain, or the chief or sheriff themselves, because they're small agencies and they don't have the resources to have dedicated grant management staff. So that's a challenge that we have with body-worn cameras, because of we funded a lot of smaller agencies that are first-time grantees.
So just to piggyback on what John was saying, I'm sorry, I was having an issue with my computer here. So I'm back now, but thank you so much, Geraldo and John. So when we process grant awards, if there are any deficiencies in the application, such as what John indicated, if there are any required attachments that the solicitation requires, then we would move forward the application and issue the award. But we would do that with withholding special conditions. And what that just means is that grantees need to coordinate with your assigned BJA contact, which is myself or Geraldo, to clear those withholding special conditions. Sometimes there are conditions that kind of overlap. And what I mean by that is that we do have the withholding special condition for the policy, which allows you to expend up to 10% while you're working on your policy. But keep in mind that if you have other withholdings on your grant, such as for other required documentation, those withholding special conditions actually withhold 100% of the funds. So they supersede that one that allows you to expend up to 10%. So it's very important that when you receive your award document, that you review all of your special conditions. Mm-hmm. And typically, if there are any that withhold the funds, they will be typically listed at the very end. So if you take a look at your special conditions pages, if there are any additional conditions, you want to address those as quickly as possible, so that we can do what we need to do on our end in order to release that special condition, and then you can move forward with working on your policies, etc.
Thank you, John and Tamara.
And keep in mind that you cannot start your project procurement process, anything, until all special conditions are met.
Thank you, Gerardo. And I just want to note that there are a couple things that our presenters have put in the chat. So there's the JustGrants training support email. So in case that you're having any issues or questions and you want to reach out to them directly, feel free to do that. As well as Darius, who mentioned that if anyone has a question about budgetary costs, you can reach out to Tamara or Gerardo directly. So I believe we either talked about procurement a little bit yesterday, or we'll be doing that today and throughout the conference, but we do have another question. Do my planned procurement methods comply with federal grant requirements? Does anyone want to touch on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you repeat that question again?
Mm-hmm.
Of course. So one of the standard questions that we would ask our grantees to reach out to BJA about would be if their planned procurement methods comply with the federal grant requirements. So I think that we'll be having a procurement session later on today. But so do you all want to leave that question kind of for them to talk about there, or is there anything you'd like to touch on about what you look for with whether or not a grantee is complying with the federal procurement requirements?
Well, the procurement, the one procurement requirement that I can think of that we have is the open and competitive procurement process.
Mm-hmm.
We do require that all procurement is selected through an open and fair process. However, if a grantee, if there is going to be sole source, if it meets a certain threshold, they have to come in with a formal modification, what we call grant adjustment modification. Now they're called GANs instead of GANs in the old system. But they would, I believe that that threshold is $250,000 now. Although you can correct me.
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
Okay, so it used to be it used to be lower than that, but now it's $250,000. And grantees really should have their own local written policies and procedures as it relates to sole source for amounts that that are lower than the federal threshold.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone to please mute if you're not speaking. So there's another question that we can pose to you all. So how do I submit a budget adjustment request? So is that different than a budget modification?
Sounds like it's the same to me. A budget adjustment request and budget modification sounds like the same to me. I mean, if you can get a little clarity from that person, but overall, if like to piggyback on what we discussed earlier, they will go into the grant JustGrants system and submit it, that way. And there's how-to tutorials that the grantee, different resources online that'll help them to be able to submit a modification in JustGrants successfully. And then we also have the JustGrants support desk that can help them walk through that process.
Thank you. So Jen and Lisa, I think that kind of is a great segue. Do you all have any questions that you're getting repeatedly asked, or things that you'd like to kind of talk about to help others who may be going through that, who maybe just don't know what to be asking?
I can start, and then if Lisa has anything to add here, which is, so I did in the chat, there's the link to that online resource about sort of how to go about initiating the grant award modification. And one of the sort of questions that we often get is, because if you're used to the sort of GMS system, just the way you went about initiating a GAN is a little different than how you would do a grant award modification in JustGrants. And to do it in JustGrants, you first have to, one, be assigned as a specific role for that award, or one of two roles, really the grant award administrator or alternate grant award administrator for the award itself. And once you are, you actually search for the award. You then need to open the award itself. And that is maybe a little less intuitive than, some people is obvious when you're looking at it. And that's what the job aid goes through, is how to actually open the award in the right way so that you can initiate the GAM. And in particular, what that means is you are probably going to be presented with an assignment screen that has some information in it on how to actually sort of click a begin button and open the award itself so that you can then submit the request. So I think those are the sort of number one questions I often get in, which is, which users associated with the grantees can initiate these, and then how to actually open that award first to be able to submit the GAM. Lisa, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That really is one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we find when people are trying to initiate grant award modifications. And I did put in the chat a link to our training resources. We do have sort of step-by-step guides and videos to help you with this process. And they're available sort of anytime. We have little sort of micro learning videos that are typically less than 3 or 4 minutes long that can help you walk through specific steps if you're sort of struggling. And then also, if there's something that's not available in the training materials that you want to ask us sort of a more personal question, please feel free to send us an email at the training support inbox, and we'll answer your question, or at least get it to the people who can answer your question on how to step through JustGrants.
Thank you both. And again, we really do encourage any of the participants in today's meeting, please feel free to just put a chat right in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and direct that to the appropriate person to answer that. So in the absence of another question, I'll go ahead and pose another one. So there's some reporting that we've been talking about that the grantees do through, I believe, both of your systems. So when do the grantees need to inform BJA about changes to their program goals and objectives?
So are we talking about programmatic reporting, which we do through the PMT, which is quarterly, versus JustGrants, which is semi-annually? And then I think I heard the last part of that question was, when does the grantee need to notify us about changes in their proposed goals and objectives? That sounds like three different questions to me.
I think you're right. I think I probably just posed that wrong, but maybe we could cover both of those questions, okay, kind of differentiating both of those systems.
Okay, so like I said, the reporting requirements programmatically for this program is that grantees must report in the PMT on a quarterly basis. Then on a semi-annual basis, they need to upload the corresponding semi-annual PMT report into JustGrants. So let me just break it down, because we get this a lot where the grantee has uploaded the wrong PMT report into the formal record system, which is JustGrants. So that report for quarter ending March 31st is not the report that we're looking for to go into to be attached to the JustGrants report semi-annual. So we need the 6/30 PMT report to be uploaded to the 6/30 JustGrant report. And the reason why is because the semi-annual report, so the 6/30 PMT and the 12/31 PMT has different questions. It has narrative questions that they need to complete, and that's the difference between the two reports. And the report that they need to be uploading is the PDF format. We see different formats where the grantee, it looks like sometimes they're uploading an HTML file or some other variation, but there's an option to download the actual PDF version of the PMT, and then they have to go over into JustGrants and upload that version of the 6/30 or the 12/31 PMT, whichever period that it is, and upload that into JustGrants. So that's the reporting piece. So they are required at this time to still report into 2 different systems. And from my understanding, that's going to soon be consolidated into just reporting into one system. But for right now, we're still reporting in 2 different systems. Now, part 2 of that question, Gerardo, do you want to jump in and answer part 2 of the question?
If they're going to change scope of the grant, they need to talk to us, just to call us, and we can guide them. They'll need to submit a GAM, change the scope GAM.
Roberto, what does the change of scope GAM entail?
What if the change is what? I'm sorry?
What does that entail? You know, is it a simple form?
No, just provide a justification in the system in JustGrants.
Okay, thank you.
And just to piggyback off of what Gerardo said, this, like you said, it's no form per se, but what I would like to see in a scope change, essentially it's a narrative. But what I would like to see is the grantee to describe what their project originally proposed, and then explain the new project in depth, so that there's the full explanation as to what exactly they are changing. And that would just be a Microsoft Word document, and then they will upload it into the appropriate JustGrants scope change. GAM. Yeah, there's a lot of different layers in JustGrants, so I'm not quite sure what the name. I think it is scope change, but it's different, and we're still getting used to it ourselves.
Yeah, and I can confirm that. That is, it's called a scope change GAM, and you go in there and first it's under a type of programmatic GAMs, and then it's a scope change is one of the programmatic GAMs that are available. And it is, and to the discussion, right, most of it is really just justification, and it allows attachments. But there is a really small little piece of it that you select what type of scope change you're doing. For example, are you changing the purpose of it? Or are you changing the sites or the people delivering it? So there is a little radio button that you can do one or more of those in the form as well.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions that they're looking to pose, or other things that they're looking to ask? We have a really great opportunity with a lot of people in one place right now. So if you have any questions about your grant, about anything related to BJA, it would be really great if you'd like to just post that in the chat, and we can get that directed to the right person. Seems like you all have been very comprehensive, and our grantees do not have many questions. I'm going to say that probably my last question that we have is, which of the budgeted costs are allowable, and how do I verify match expenditures? Is that something that any of y'all would like to answer?
Okay, so the question was, what budgetary costs are allowable?
Yeah, so it says, which of my budgeted costs are allowable, and how do I verify match expenditures?
Well, if your budget has been approved by OCFO, then all of your costs are allowable. But we also ask grantees that they become familiar with the DOJ financial guide. There's a section in there regarding unallowable costs. So we definitely request that grantees familiarize themselves with the DOJ guide, as well as the solicitation. The grant solicitation serves as program guidance post-award. So if there's anything identified in the solicitation as being unallowable, or if there's anything specifically identified in the DOJ financial guide, then those costs will be disallowed. An example of other costs that will be disallowed will be costs that occur outside of the project period, or any costs that were incurred prior to all of your withholding special conditions being released. So those special conditions that we talked about earlier, and this is something that comes up, so I'm glad the question came up. They specifically prohibit grantees from obligating, expending, or drawing down funds. So what that means is that a grantee may not use their own funds to expend against the grant, and with the expectation of reimbursing themselves once the federal funds become available. So that's something really important to understand, and that's why it's so important for grantees to try to get those withholdings cleared as early as possible.
Thank you. And I do see that we had a question from one of our grantees. So what are the chances of being awarded if you received awards last year?
I think that question, yeah, probably best for me. So it's a little hard to say without knowing the exact context. So multi-year awards are possible, and typically what that entails is when an agency applies for body-worn cameras, but not necessarily for full implementation. So we've had agencies that have applied for a pilot program and then they decide to expand their program. We've had agencies that have partially deployed body-worn cameras with BWC PIP funds in 1 year. I think, so the Los Angeles Police Department is a good example. They started their own body-worn camera program partially in their agency. They expanded it appreciably with funding from BWC PIP. I don't remember the exact year, 2015 and 2016. And then they came back several years later and applied for funding to expand body-worn cameras to their transit bureau, which had not previously had body-worn cameras. So generally, I think if you're expanding your program, getting new body-worn cameras, you do a good job of in your grant, submission, hitting all the check marks on what the submission should contain, a commitment to a full program, policy development, training, the use of digital evidence media. You will be, eligible for funding in the next year. Basically, you should use the same due diligence in completing the application. Don't assume, I think it's dangerous sometimes in general when people assume that the folks that are reading this will have knowledge about their prior grant performance. You should really provide all justifications about the competencies and capabilities of your agency within the solicitation. Don't assume that, somebody from BJA is reading this, because it's generally external peer reviewers. Don't assume that somebody from BJA is reading it and says, oh, they know we're a great grantee and we did everything we needed to do, because that's not going to be read into the new application. But it's possible to apply for expanding your program.
Thanks, John. We had another question from the same.
Jessica,
oh, I'm sorry.
Jessica, I'm sorry. I think I neglected to answer the second part of that question. I think they asked something about the match as well. Was the question how could they verify their match or allowability of the match? What was that part of the question exactly?
Yeah, it was how do they verify match expenditures?
I may need a little more clarity about verifying match expenditures, but let me just go off of what I'm thinking they may be asking. The match is a part of the project since it is a required match. So your matching funds have to also be a part of your total budget that gets approved through OCFO. In other words, you have to give a detailed account for your matching dollars line by line specifically, just like you do with the federal funds. And one thing that's important to know about your matching dollars is that matching costs are held to the same standards as the federal dollars. So whatever you're using for your match, it will be audited and monitored with the same regulations that we do of the federal dollars. So, but if I didn't answer that question, then maybe they can come back and clarify.
There was a second question posed by one of our grantees about can departments such as the fire department apply for body-worn cameras? John, did you want to answer that?
It's very doubtful, not unless they are deemed a law enforcement agency. So no, that's really comes from the appropriations language that this is a grant for law enforcement agencies. So we do have some correctional agencies which perform law enforcement functions that have applied and received body-worn cameras, but fire departments would not be eligible under this grant program.
Thank you. And so Darius went ahead and posted in the chat the link to the solicitation. So we do have an open solicitation right now, or BJA, I'm sorry, has an open solicitation for funding for body-worn cameras. And we're hosting a webinar to discuss the new solicitation. I believe it's going to be June 29th next week. And so there's a link that you can register in there as well. So just while we're on that topic, if you have any other questions about that, I would recommend attending that, and we'll get into a little bit more detail during that webinar. So we have about 10 more minutes for any other questions for our BJA folks who are on the line. Do any other grantees have any questions that you'd like us to answer today, whether it's surrounding JustGrants, your grant reporting, or anything just for your state policy advisors?
And also they can call us directly or email us directly.
We have a really nice message in the chat. Thank you. It says, well, I'd like to thank everyone that has helped me along the way with my BJA grants. They've been friendly and helpful and surprisingly pleasant, and most importantly, patient. So that's great. I hope a great note to you all.
That's my grantee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Geraldo, you're so great. That's wonderful.
Do any of you all presenters have any other things that you think would be beneficial for the grantees to kind of to know about, to maybe as they're moving forward, thinking about possibly applying for another year, or just kind of navigating some of the landmines in their current grant?
Now, just like Geraldo said, if there are any questions that you all were not able to think of during this session, then you can just contact us directly. Our contact information is right there on the screen. So either one of us will gladly help you.
Yeah, I would just echo that and just say, we're here to help. We recognize, as I mentioned, that not all our grantees are grant savvy. We have smaller agencies, first-time grantees, and it can be a daunting process, probably even more so now with the changes with JustGrants. But we try to be patient and we try to be pleasant, as somebody complimented Gerardo for being. And so we're here to help, but there's no silly question. And I think that just for this grant also, it's unique. So one of the conditions, as we mentioned, is getting the policy scorecard completed and approved, or submitting your self-certification that your policy is deliberate, robust, and comprehensive. So we use the TTA provider sort of as a conduit for that, but we at BJA clear the special conditions. So if you have questions about budget modifications, questions about procurement, those should be going to your state policy advisor, not through your TTA team, don't expect them to answer those questions. I mean, you might discuss that with them, but it's really the responsibility of BJA, and to avoid confusion, you should be going to your state policy advisors for those types of questions.
Thank you, John. And if you all have access to the Whova web app, in one of the documents that's available under the resources tab, there is a document that will show you questions. And it was a lot of the questions that we discussed today. You know, which questions are really more for BJA and your state policy advisors, and what's more appropriate in the line of the training and technical assistance team. So sometimes we understand that can be a difficult line to navigate. So we've kind of created a document for you to help along with that roadmap. I do see one other question that has come in for the JustGrants team. So what improvements are being made to the JustGrants system? It's been a challenge to navigate the system. It has many problems. So I think that a lot of people have just been aware, you know, of some of the challenges, but you all were discussing some of the improvements. You know, are there others that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, and I think I can maybe start by saying is that, right, sort of the transition to JustGrants marked transitions in a number of ways. It was a transition to a new drawdown system. If you're a current grantee, it was a transition to a new sort of federal government accounting system for DOJ, and it was the transition to the new JustGrants. So one thing I think to acknowledge, right, is like with that sort of transition, there was a lot of sort of compounding issues on sort of, you know, how people can log into the system. And so I think one thing to start with is, right, that sort of transition isn't going to happen again once sort of everyone is sort of onboarded and all of these systems are sort of up and running, right? Then it's the starting point to start building on and improving from there. And so I think the second part of that then is to get to the sort of point about sort of what improvements are planned. There's actually a whole host, and I think to get into all of them today we would run out of time, but the way the sort of system was developed was under this sort of concept that it was launched with the sort of minimal functionality, with the idea that you build upon it over time. So even just the way it's structured, there is ongoing continuous work to enhance and improve it. And so that work is already sort of planned out for months ahead. And so the last point I'll make is, you know, one of the things that drives that is when those sort of help desk questions come in, or the support questions come in, and the feedback there. So if you all continue to have, you know, suggestions and problems, I know you don't always get to see sort of how that gets translated to the sort of higher level and implemented, but it is feedback that ultimately gets sort of translated and implemented, and it might not be addressed immediately or tomorrow, but it's something that definitely factors into sort of this enhancements and improvements. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying that there's a whole bunch of improvements planned. The feedback is very helpful and matters, and do think that it'll continue to get better.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to what Jen has to say as well. There, with so many upcoming new enhancements and features, and this evolving system that we have, it's really worthwhile to go to the link that I placed in the chat for JustGrants news and updates. You can sign up to have any news and updates sent to you, and this includes sort of every piece of information you might need to know about what will impact you as you work with your applications and your funded awards. And it also will provide sometimes information on upcoming training possibilities, and again, you know, all other sort of information that will be useful to you at that time. But please take the time to sign up for it. It doesn't really take very long.
Well, I just want to thank you all for participating today in our office hours. I think it was really great. A lot of people really got a lot out of it, and we'll definitely place this recording on the website just in case other people do have other information. And for those that did attend, I would encourage you either to attend tomorrow, or maybe let some of your other friends who are running the grant programs to attend tomorrow. We will have another office hours tomorrow, you know, at the same time. So with that, John, would you like to say anything in closing, kind of before we go on break ahead of our releasing body-worn camera keynote?
No, I just reiterate what I said. I think, you know, we're here to help you don't hesitate to reach out to the state policy advisors. If you have questions, we'll work to resolve the issues and challenges you have. So thanks for moderating, Jessica. Thanks everybody for participating.
All right, thank you. We'll go on a break and we'll see you all back in about 10 minutes.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.